everyone. Welcome to the Naughty Shaman podcast. I'm your host, Natalie Carlisle, and I can't wait to dive in to a world where the sacred meets the wild and keeps things totally real. In each episode, we are going to dive into what it truly means to live a radiant life that is unapologetically real. And if you're ready to get started, so am I. Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Naughty Shaman podcast. My name is Natalie Carlisle, and I am so happy to be your host. In each episode, we, take a look and explore different elements of spiritual life and what it means to live a sacred life and to go through the journey that brings us into awakening and releasing the layers that have clouded our eyes away from the truth. And right now I'm in the middle of a series called How I Became a Shaman. How did this blonde chick from Ohio end up in this weird world of shamanism? And tonight I want to share with you part 3. Part 3 is this chapter of life and a chapter of, I think, many of our journeys where we realize how strange we were. In part 2, I was like, oh my gosh, I met this woman who was a dream, and the lion and the crow and all these things kind of converged. Realities overlapped. And it really hit me in the face like, girl, you're not normal. And I left the desert in the middle of the night. I ran from the desert and I'm like, I'm going to go be normal. And I remember driving all the way home from the desert in Nevada and thinking, okay, what do normal people do? And it was like a struggle. And I thought, okay, normal people get married, they have kids, they go to happy hours. Maybe I'll start going to happy hours. So what ended up happening is with my new quest to be normal, of course, the universe went, here you go. And I was offered a job to work at Nationwide Financial in Columbus, Ohio, which is the headquarters where all the action is, right? So big downtown skyscraper, high heels. I hung up my hiking boots and got on some Prada heels and strutted around, one Nationwide Plaza like I owned the joint. I was an arrogant, amazing, inspired and excited and what's the word I'm looking for? I guess that's all. But I was really into organizational development and what makes teams work because I've been studying people, all my life so far, albeit I was a bit young, but I had a knack for understanding what makes people tick and what in particular makes teams work or not work. And that was sort of my specialty, was developing teams and coaching leaders to lead teams. And so I put together several programs and did this at Nationwide. And I was so normal. I wore a suit. I had 5 black suits. They used to call me Johnny Cash because I would wear black on black on black. And it was just my favorite color. I felt like I looked good in it. And that was it. So life was pretty awesome. And I was going to be normal. Mm-hmm. So my mom comes down to visit me while I am living in Ohio and I'm single and I'm kicking ass and I'm playing soccer. I'm doing all this cool shit, but I still have the sacred area in my apartment, my altar, where I had the wing of a crow that one of my teachers had given me. I had a pipe that one of my teachers' mentors had given me. I had turkey feathers that were made into a fan that one of my mentors and friends had given to me. I had pictures of wolves because that was an animal that spoke to me, their fierce love of family, the archetype of the teacher and the family, and the alphas protect and serve. And so I was really into all this. And my mother comes down. And she's like, oh, I'll help you clean up. I'm like, great. I haven't cleaned in a month, so that'll be great. So she's cleaning, and then she says, all this stuff. And she did that look, moms do And I was like, uh-oh, here it comes. And she said, do you ever want to get married, Natalie? And I'm on a quest to be normal. So I said, yes, I do. And she said, well, no one's really going to fall in love with you or anybody that has all this weird stuff. So, maybe you're growing out of it now. Then I remember gathering a black trash bag, and having such a wound in myself that I thought to myself, yeah, you're probably right. I'm never going to meet a husband or have children or do any of that normal stuff that I want to do if I have the remnants of this old wild life of mine. And I remember taking an owl wing, the crow wing, and the pipe, and the crystals, and the whatever, and the tarot cards, and throwing it in this black trash bag. As if I was just, throwing out books I'm done reading, or not even books. I kept all the books. The books were even more sacred in that moment. I threw them away very unceremoniously. And I said goodbye to my old life on my quest to be normal. Amazing. It still hurts a little when I talk about it, how quickly I turned my back on myself and all my gifts and all my experiences. So I shoved that stuff in a closet and I threw a bunch of it away, and I never was going to do that again because I was going to be normal. Damn it. So I accepted this job at Nationwide. I threw away my stuff, and in my, glory of normal, now I was ready to meet people and go to happy hours and do all the things normal people do. So I'm drinking and playing soccer, having fun, meet my husband. We're drunk while walking through the Taco Bell drive-thru at like 2 a.m. right in downtown Columbus, totally declaring our love for one another after a few weeks. And 6 months later, we were engaged to be married. And so it was finally going to have normal. And this guy was salt of the earth, good, not going to lie, not going to cheat, not going to steal, like salt of the earth, good soul, which for Queen of Rebellion was like foreign. It was very foreign to be with such a good and gentle soul. And it felt nice. And so that was my path to normal. Now, during this time also, some very significant events occurred. My father retired and moved to Delaware, which is where I live now. Actually, he moved here, right? Like 500 yards away, and started to live his dream of being by the ocean and fly fishing and just being in nature more, and just communing with all the beauty that there is in the world and the trees and everything, and not working so hard. So he left Davy Tree and came to Delaware in retirement with my mom. And soon after he moved here, he found out that he had bladder cancer. And it was devastating for all of us. And I was traveling back and forth from Ohio to see him, and on and on. And my dad and I had this very special connection. And during his illness, he had great spirits. I mean, he bench pressed his body weight about 4 or 5 days before he died. That's how much of a badass this guy is. Like, he came home like, ugh, my side hurts. And I'm on the phone with him and I'm like, Dad, why your side hurt? And he's like, I don't know. I went to the doctor and they think I might have broken a rib. I'm like, you're lifting weights. You've got cancer metastasized into your bones, and you're lifting weights and probably cracked a rib because you're that badass. So this is this guy. He just, the end of his life was just on fire, living it, And I was in Ohio, and one night I remember I woke up out of this dream, and this dream was about my dad. And my dad and I were looking in the skies at different things. And in reality, my dad and I had always wanted to see an iridium flare, which is a little particle that comes through the Earth's atmosphere. And you can usually see them at like the twilight or the dusk times or the morning times, the in-between times. And it shoots across the sky in a gorgeous blue color. And we never, ever saw one live, right? We only saw them in magazines and stuff like that. So this was like our white whale. And so in the dream, my dad and I were out on the golf course again, looking through the telescope, looking into the skies, all the constellations, and looking for these iridium flares, right? And in my dream, we're setting it up, and he goes, Nat, you can have the first look. And I'm like, no, Dad, you got to have the first look. He's like, no, you go look. And I remember looking at his face and being like, oh, what love. And then I looked into the telescope, and I'm looking, and shoo, Iridium Flare. And I'm so excited. I turn around and I'm like, Dad. And he was gone. And there was something inside me, even in the dream, that knew that Iridium Flare was my father's soul crossing over. And I took it in my bones like an omen. And it was like 1 in the morning or 2 in the morning, some crazy amount of time. And so I gathered my dog. I called off work. I jumped in my Jeep and I drove out to Delaware. And so by the time I got to Delaware, it was 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning. And my dad was awake. And my mom was still asleep. So my dad was downstairs awake in his chair because when you have cancer and it hurts, you can't, it's not comfortable anywhere. So he had this really comfy chair that kind of helped. So he was asleep in his chair and he saw me come in the door and I looked at him and he looked at me and he said, I know you know. And I just started to cry. And I said, I know. And he said, we don't have much longer. And I said, I know. We just kind of cried and then made breakfast. And, 4 days later, he was gone. So that was devastating to me because my father had been like that one person that no matter how weird I was or how many mistakes I made, I felt like this is the guy who's going to have my back no matter what. I thought he was like everything, the bee's knees. And so when I lost my father, I felt like I was anchorless in the world. And that drove me to want to be normal so bad and to be married and have a job and be settled down so I could feel safe again on the planet. And so I did. Got married right away, bought the house right away, like on a mission, like a woman obsessed. Was like, we're going to buy the house. We're going to get a black lab. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. We're going to start a family. Like I was seriously on a mission. My poor husband at the time must have been like, what is wrong with this chick? But there was just a driving force in me to connect to the planet that I was living in, because with Dad gone, I felt like untethered a little bit. And so I just needed to anchor myself down into normal reality. Well, you know how that works, friends. When you start to reject a part of you that is natural, that's a gift, that's real, and you're like, I'm not going to be that because that's lousy, and I'm going to be this thing instead. And you put on the mask and you put on the facade. It doesn't last for very long. My weird started to leak out all over the place. And so I really got sad after my 2 kids were born, because I was sad because a little of the postpartum thing, like your life changes. It's crazy. Like I couldn't wear high heels and cashmere anymore because I was carrying an extra 40 pounds of weight on both hips, 20 year and 20 year. And they were always puking. So it's like cashmere and heels kind of go away for a while, and work went away. And one thing that surprised me was after I had kids, I thought I'd just go back to work and be normal. And as soon as I saw those faces, which I had dreamt about before I had them, by the way, so I knew them before I knew them. And they were there, and I looked at them and I was like, I think I'm going to stick around for this. I never went back to Nationwide, and I never went back to working full time like that. And I started to suffer because I didn't have a job. I had these 2 babies. There was all this stress. I was disconnected from my soul. Then I sold my business in Connecticut, sold my business in Ohio, moved to Connecticut, and I was sort of a wreck. And I remember like I hadn't showered in days, maybe even a week, and I was sad. And every time the kids wanted to play, I was like, ugh, it took all the energy in me. And so I finally called my executive coach. I'm like, Debbie, I'm not right. I don't know what to do. Like I've seen my doctor, I don't know what to do. And she said, your soul needs to do healing. And I remember telling Deborah, I was like, I don't need another doctor, gal. I've been to the doctor. And she was like, no, not a doctor. This is about your soul, Natalie. And I remember thinking, I vaguely remember my soul. I kind of, when she said, it's about your soul, there was something in me that went, whoa. There is something in my soul. I remembered something. And she said, get on the Kripalu website and go find a class that speaks to your soul. So I started yoga again, and I found this weird class in shamanism with Alberto Villoldo, a guy I'd never even heard of. And I was like, well, those weekends work. I'm going to do both of them at the same time. I'm going to do bam, bam, back to back weekends and just kind of churn this out because I got to get sorted out. And I fell in love with yoga, fell in love with the shamanic work at that time. And that's how I ended up kind of coming back home to me. And it wasn't until my dad died, I moved and sold my business. I was sort of depressed, not sort of depressed. I was really depressed after my second child was born, and I moved and all this change, and my dad was gone, and then my mom died, and now I was an orphan. And luckily my mom and I got to heal a lot of things before she left, and she had a beautiful ladylike exit from this life. It was stunning. None of us were there. We were all there for days and days and days, and then all of a sudden we all got tired. And we all were like, okay, I'm going to go lay down. I'm going to go lay down. And that's when she took her leave. And after mom died, I felt as if my parents had given me permission to follow my own path. I was sad, and I was also freed from their expectations, if that makes sense. And in my grief, I found a freedom. And in my grief, I got to heal that in a new way through yoga and shamanism. And so that's how I came. I came into the work. And I'll never forget, I was in this underworld journey. Everybody was in love with Alberto, first of all. I didn't even know who he was. Everyone's like, oh, I read your books and I think you're amazing, whatever. And I'm like, I'm here because it's a good weekend. I don't know if you're going to be able to do anything for me, but I'm here. I was so arrogant, right? I was like, prove it to me that you're going to fix this piece of shit mess, So I can't even imagine how I started this journey, but I was a hot and holy mess. And so I forget my point was going to be, but I remember being in training with him, and I was going to be the demo. And they were going to illustrate some process. They were going to open a chakra. I didn't even know about if chakras were real. I never worked in them. I remember reading about them, but that was about it. So I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever. I don't have anything. And he's like, oh, what's going on in your life? And I'm like, well, not that much. I feel pretty good. Da, da, da. My mom died and my dad died, and I moved just here like a couple months ago, and that's all. He was like, okay, blow in a stone. And I blew in the stone. I'm like, whatever. As soon as I lay down, put the stone on my heart, I start like seizing. Like my whole body went rigid. And I remember my hands were like contorted all crazy. It was like lightning was shooting through my body. And I remember just like shaking on the table. And I kind of looked over at the audience. There were like 30 people in the audience over there. And I remember seeing one of them go, oh my God, like she's possessed. Because I was like, and my teeth were so clenched, so tight too. And I was like, is this normal? And my teacher, she said, yeah, it's okay. Just breathe. I'm like, oh, just breathe in. Why can't I move anything? And she said, there's just a lot of energy to release. And I wept like I had never wept before after that. It was an incredible permission to have such a sacred space to be seen. And in that moment of my heart chakra being opened for the first time, probably since high school when I put Corey in the ground, right? Having my heart open again was like the thing that set me free. It was the thing that set me free and started to create possibilities in my life again. And I knew I was hooked. I was just hooked. So how I started to work for the Four Winds is the last story I want to tell in this chapter. Because it was, again, just so sacred. After all this strangeness and pain and loss and confusion and denial of who I was finally here, in a place where being me and being a dreamer and a visionary and a quirky bit was actually not just accepted, but celebrated. There's a difference. Like, it's wonderful to be accepted and supported, but this element of being celebrated was incredible for me. And I absolutely just fell in love with the work because of that element. And I felt safe enough to start expanding who I was in the world. And I had this dream I wasn't even in class, but I studied shamanism for several years with Alberto. Oops, sorry about the crash. With Alberto here in the States, out in Utah, down south in Peru, with different people in Peru, with different, Mauricio Bruce in Costa Rica. So this just really began my journey of teachers and teachings and learning and beginning and starting over again. And during this time, I had this dream where, I was just like dream, 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 dream. And then all of a sudden, it was like time and space created this little whoop bubble. And I walked through this bubble, and in there was Alberto, of all people, sitting in this chair that had one of those, wicker backs, like a throne, like a throne, like a wicker throne, right? And he's sitting on this chair, and he's like cool as all can be. And he looks at me in my eyes in this dream and goes, "You and me, we're going to meet in 6 months. We'll talk then." And then the bubble closed and my dream continued on to whatever was going on, I was like, that was weird, right? This little cameo appearance from my teacher I haven't seen in months. So I call my friend Paul. I'm like, Paul, I had this crazy dream, Alberto, the thing, 6 months, no. And I never thought about it again. But she was like, I'll hold space for this dream because we were magic sisters, right? And still are, actually. So off I go into life and and I forgot all about it. And I graduated from yoga teacher training, and all of a sudden, everybody had been going to Peru, and I was always like, eye roll. You don't have to go to Peru to do this and to study this. And who do these people think they are? Fake shamans going to wear feathers in their hair? And I was so judgy. Oh my gosh, I was so judgy, so arrogant. So I never felt called to Peru until I felt called to Peru. And it was like, boing, you got to go to Peru in 3 weeks. And I remember telling my husband at the time, I woke up and I was like, I have to go to Peru. And he was like, okay, when? And I was like, in 3 weeks. He was like, I've had it with you. And, but he said yes. And so off I went, and I get there, day late and a dollar short, find my way to the hotel, and my friend Paula is there, and she wasn't supposed to be there either. So here we both had this dream. We both end up at this place in Peru, and I'm like, oh my God. So we celebrate by hitch and by stitch. We have all these tours planned, and, there are like hundreds of people on this trip, whatever. By hitch or by stitch, we slept in late because we were such naughty shamans. So anyway, whatever. We're having breakfast with the late crowd. There's only like 20 people there, maybe 15, 20 people. And Alberto's drinking coffee with the late crowd and whatever. And there are protests going on. So they're putting rocks in the street. So like where we were going to go that day, we couldn't go. So Alberto was like, hey, you guys want to go to this weird sacred site that no one else really goes to that often? And we were all like, hell yeah. So we get in this tiny little van with Alberto. And my friend Paula goes, oh my God, this is it. This is your dream. 6 months. It was actually 7 months, but 6 months later, there's Alberto. You should go tell him about your dream. And I was like, girl, that's crazy. But I did it. So I shake and shimmy all nervous up to the front of the bus where Alberto's sitting. And I said, and he was like, sit down. And I was like, okay. And I was just shaking and nervous. I don't even know why. It's so funny to think about now. And he says, what's on your mind? And I said, well, listen, it's going to sound maybe weird, but I had this dream about you. And you said we were going to talk, and all of a sudden this moment came to pass, and it feels like the moment where we're going to talk. And I want to tell you about this vision I have for my life. I want to create a luminous army. I want to build a luminous army filled with luminous warriors. I want it to combine yoga, and I want it to combine these old philosophies. I want it to combine leadership stuff. And I want to be able to use some of the language in one of your books. That he wrote a book about the Yoga Sutras. And so I wanted to use some of the wisdom from there. And I said, is that going to be okay? And he said, yeah, that's fine. But why don't you work for us and do that here? Do that inside the Four Winds. And I was like, holy shit. Yes. So, 5-minute conversation, my whole life changes. And I'm like, yes, I'm a big fat yes to this. And it was so funny because to become an assistant at the time, it took years. Like people were like doing years and years of work to become an assistant. So then in comes Natalie. Like after one bus ride in Peru, boom, here comes Natalie. She's going to teach yoga now in the school. And it was just like really awkward but awesome experience. And so that's how it all started. And I just fell in love with the work and the teachers there. And I had the good fortune of traveling around to different things with Alberto, with the other teachers of the Four Winds, and just soaked up as much wisdom as I could. And at the same time was working with some folks, outside of that circle in other shamanic circles from Ireland and from, like I said, Central America and from actually Chile at the time. So it was just magical, just magical. And that's when I was sitting in class up in the mountains of Peru. And we were going on a journey to the underworld. And we were going to go to the journey in the underworld and to see what needed to be healed. And the underworld guardian in the Peruvian Incan tradition is Huascar Inca. So I get down there, my guardian, Huascar Inca, comes. And as soon as he sees me, he grabs my hair and chops off my head in this shamanic journey. And I was like, dang, I'm like the worst shaman ever. Like I've been down here for 5 seconds and I've lost my head. Like that's shitty, right? So I'm like, well, let's see what happens. And so Huascar goes off into the jungle with my head, and me and my headless body go off, follow him. And there's this big fire in the jungle in this journey. And he takes my head and he sings a song and he just shakes out all this shit. Like goo was just coming out of my head, and he's pulling it out, and he plucks out my eyes from that skull and throws them in the fire. And he's like scraping the bowl like a batter bowl, right? He's scraping my skull, throwing all this shit in the fire. And I was just watching with my luminous eyeballs, like, what in the world is going on? And then he grabbed these sacred herbs from the jungle and he packed them up in my brain and ran my skull over the fire. And there's smoke coming out of my eyes and ear sockets of the sacred herbs and whatever. And then he plunks my head back on my body, and he takes like these 2 sapphires and he goes bam, bam, and then turns on my eyes. And Huascar goes, now you can see. And I was like, no shit. After Huascar did that, I could see in like high def down in the underworld and in physical reality. I was like, wow. It was like my eyes had been shut my whole life. It was like I was blind and now I could see. It was like I was black and white, now I could see color. Like the vision became so pure after this moment. And then Huascar and I were sitting around the fire in the underworld in a shamanic journey, like you do. And Huascar said, you can't leave. You know that, right? This is your time. If you leave now, there's no coming back to this path. Like this path is meant for you. And I was like, oh, I really want to run and I really want to be normal still. And he's like, no, you have to own it. You cannot hide anymore. You cannot hide anymore. And that's when I decided to take the company name of Naughty Shaman, right? Can't hide with a name like Naughty Shaman. You're ornery and you're a shaman. It pretty much sums up everything. My whole journey. You were naughty and then you were a shaman. And there's no hiding anymore. And I still want to hide from time to time, my friends. I'll tell you, there's some days I yearn for ignorance, right? Ignorance and sleepiness. And then I remember how absolutely glorious it is to see the world, how wisdom keepers see the world. And I would never go back. I would never go back. So that's how I came to be here. And then other invitations occurred. I literally got another calling to go to Peru, a phone call. And this woman from Chile says, hey, come and let's design a class about the shadow work and Joseph Campbell. And I'm like, yeah, I don't even speak Spanish. I think you have the wrong girl. And she's like, no, you're the right one. Let's go. And that was 10 years ago. And I work with her still. She's my sister, my beautiful friend. And then I got called to Michigan. Hey, come do a workshop. We want, and I was like, okay, we're going to do these quirky things around the medicine wheel. And that's how Dharma School was born. Each person that seems to cross my path just seems to have an invitation further, another invitation further, whether it's a student or a mentor or a teacher or just a dream. There's an invitation into the further to take your life one more step. And I find that the quieter I get, the more I can hear the invitation. Because the universe is talking to us all the time. Like before there were Bibles and Qurans and all these things and the Torah, like before there were all these tablets, there was the cosmos, there was the natural world unfolding with energy and matter and this purity of, for lack of a better word, I would call God, this oneness, this source, this energy, the one, the all that is. And this all that is all there is. It's what animates life. It's what animates the dreams and visions we have in our brains and our hearts. It's all that is. And it's all that ever was, and it's all that ever will be. And every other thing we tell ourselves is just a story for our own entertainment. So it's just been a fascinating dive down the rabbit hole. And I invite you, if you've been listening to these podcasts, girl, boy, person out there, you are definitely getting some kind of calling into some teaching, to some way of holding space, because we are right now in a time of elevating our consciousness rapidly. It's rapid what's going on. If you feel like you've lived 10 lifetimes in the last year, you're right, because our evolution, our consciousness is evolving at a very quick rate right now. There are a lot of theories, metaphysical and scientific, of why it feels that way. But our experience is telling us that there is a quickening happening on the planet right now. And many people are not feeling it or aware of it. And that's on purpose, I believe. And many people are feeling it. You are getting called into healing your shit, not on a superficial level, but at the level of your soul, at the level of your soul codes, at the level of your bones, going back through the ancestry, back through your other lifetimes, back into the depths of who you are and why you came to this planet at this time right now. We have to go inward right now to heal those wounds about not being enough, about not having enough, about not doing enough. We have to heal the not enough wound right now, because greed is what's destroying our species fundamentally. And so there are many of us that are getting called into these higher levels of consciousness and awakeness, for lack of a better term, to start to see the world from different perspectives simultaneously. And I think the people that have this ability to flip the screen and see the world through different perspectives are the people that are going to navigate through all of the changes in the next decades. They're the ones that are going to be able to navigate through the changes with more grace, with more ease, and with wisdom. Because we are in a time where wisdom is desperately needed. Wisdom over knowledge, heart over head, community over individual greed, wholeness instead of division. And we have to find a way to evolve with the times. This is our job. This is our calling right now. So, welcome. And if you need any support on your journey, you know where to go, naughtyshaman.com. But here's the thing, my darlings. Thank you so much for tuning in again. I get so much energy from your comments and from your emails after you listen to my podcast and just text me. And I appreciate it. It keeps me alive. It keeps me inspired. And I really thank you so much for tuning in. It's awesome to be in community with you and to be on this journey with you shoulder to shoulder. So this concludes the How I Became a Shaman series. And in the next episode, what we're going to start examining is our emotional health and how our emotions can be such wise teachers. So if you're wrestling with grief, or you're wrestling with anger, or you're wrestling with guilt and shame, we're going to talk about these heavy hitters and exactly what you can do to start to take power from these experiences and mulch and transmute this energy into vitality. Because every emotion that knocks on our door has a gift. And we have to slow down and go inward to understand these gifts. And I want to show you how, because it's not as hard as you'd think. All right, my loves, until next time, thanks for tuning in and thank you for listening. Natalie Carlisle, signing off from Naughty Shaman, where we like to keep the sacred a little bit wild, maybe a lot, and totally real. If you're hearing this message, you've listened to the entire episode, and for that, we are so grateful. Please reach out to us. Let us know what topics you'd like to see covered in our future episodes. Get in touch in the comments because we love to hear from you. And you can reach us on social media.